Is your magic meter running low? Well, we've got a cure for you. Welcome to Disney Coast to Coast.
Hey folks, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. I'm your host, Jeff DePauli. June is typically a month where members and fans of the theater community celebrate live theater. Typically, awards and performances would be presented at the annual Tony Awards this month, but with the continued uncertainty with the state of the world, that unfortunately will not be happening this year. But I still wanted to make sure that we at Disney Coast to Coast celebrate live theater this month in some way, shape, or form, since it brings so much joy and inspiration to my life. That is why I've decided to focus today's episode on the work Stephen Sondheim has done for the Walt Disney Company. If you aren't familiar with his name, not to worry. I have Adam Wachter, who's the music director on the hit Disney Plus series Encore, joining me to discuss the importance of Stephen Sondheim for the theater community, but also the work Mr. Sondheim has done writing music for Dick Tracy and more Disney projects. All of that's coming your way right after this. If you haven't visited DisneyCoastToCoast.com in a while, it's time you do so, as there have been quite a few updates recently. When you head to DisneyCoastToCoast.com/exclusive, you'll find exclusive compilation episodes of the podcast that you won't find in your podcast feed. One of the episodes featured there is Conversations with Disney Legends, where I have conversations with Disney legends. This compilation features the greatest stories during my time with folks like Disney legend Bob Gurr, who worked on the original Disneyland park with Walt Disney himself, Disney legend Bill Farmer, who's been the voice of Goofy and Pluto for over 30 years, and Disney legend Floyd Norman, who began working at Walt Disney Animation when he was in his 20s and was later hand-selected by Walt Disney himself to work on The Jungle Book. You'll certainly want to tune in and hear those stories. Plus, there are 4 more exclusive compilation episodes over at DisneyCoastToCoast.com/exclusive. Or you can simply visit DisneyCoastToCoast.com and click on Exclusive in the main menu. Once again, they're all available to you right now at DisneyCoastToCoast.com/exclusive.
It's time to dive into today's Disney dialogue.
Hello, Adam, and welcome back to Disney Coast to Coast. I'm so happy to have you back here.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be back. What an honor to be returning to Disney Coast to Coast.
Well, I am very excited to have you here because, of course, June is kind of the month for theater nerds, right? Like, typically it's the Tony Awards this month, and it's kind of celebrating everything theater. And unfortunately, we're not getting to do that this year because of the pandemic, but I wanted to make sure that we celebrated theater in some way, shape, or form on Disney Coast to Coast. So I had this idea of doing an episode about Stephen Sondheim and Disney. And the thing is, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of Disney fans don't necessarily know who Stephen Sondheim is. I know it sounds crazy in our world, but I figured who better.
That's okay, because what an amazing adventure they have ahead of them.
Absolutely.
Discovering who he is.
And who better to talk about it with than Professor of Musical Theater Adam Wachter.
Yeah, but listen, I'm not like a Sondheim expert. You know, there are people
who have
published books just on the man and produced documentaries and things. And I've read the books and seen the documentaries, but I'm not like the Sondheim expert. But I've done a few Sondheim shows, and I'm pretty familiar with his oeuvre, if you will.
I was going to say, you've probably worked on quite a few of his shows. So like Into the Woods, obviously, for the pilot of Encore.
Into the Woods for the pilot of Encore. I did Merrily We Roll Along at the Wallace Annenberg in Beverly Hills a few years back. And I music directed a production of Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum at Shakespeare Theater Company in D.C. And I've done like a production of West Side, which he wrote the lyrics for. Is that it? I mean, I've played the rest of it, like everything else, Sweeney and Assassins and things, I've played stuff from. I haven't actually done productions of those yet, but I've certainly seen them.
And you also, didn't you play piano for auditions in New York? Wasn't that a thing you did for a while?
Yeah, and I did a lot of Sweeney Todd when that Teeny Sweeney in the pie shop was happening. I did a lot of those.
There you go. So you are very familiar with Stephen Sondheim. So I ask you this very difficult question because Stephen Sondheim, like, in the theater world, like, arguably the single most important figure in the world of American musical theater, right?
Yeah, certainly living, yes.
Okay. So in a nutshell, how do you... What do you want to say about Stephen Sondheim to someone who may not know anything about him? Like, can you even, in a nutshell, explain how important his work is?
I can try.
Let's try.
If I'll succeed. Okay, I would say in a nutshell, Stephen Sondheim is a composer and lyricist who advanced the art form of the American musical theater to a degree that no one really previously had. I mean, he sort of took over from his mentor, Oscar Hammerstein II, who, of course, wrote book and lyrics for so many famous musicals, South Pacific, Oklahoma, King and I, et cetera, et cetera. And he kind of took the reins over from him and then just made the art form go into a new place by introducing really conversational lyrics that were still poetic and musical and really elevating the style of music theoretically that people were hearing on the Broadway stage, because until he kind of got going, the American musical theater on Broadway was very mainstream and very commercial and very always kind of uplifting and followed certain tropes and certain formulas. And he really, with his various collaborators over the year, turned all of that on its head and introduced psychology into lyric writing and made these musical moments that are songs but that still move plot forward and develop character and things that hadn't just really been done to such an extent that he developed those over the years. I don't know if any of that made any sense, but it makes sense in my head.
No, it certainly didn't. The thing that I really caught on that you just said there was, it was very mainstream Broadway, this type of stuff they were doing, and he kind of went in the other direction. And for that reason, Sondheim shows often were not hits.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's very strange because he is one of the most celebrated figures in the American musical, but a lot of times it'll take a couple decades for a show to catch on, like, to the point that it's done a lot. You know what I mean? There's a ton that seem to flop. I mean, I think one of the most famous is Merrily We Roll Along played 10 performances on Broadway?
Yeah, I think 16, but very minimal run, for sure.
Did you see the documentary about Merrily?
Of course, yes. Best, worst thing that ever could have happened.
Oh my gosh, that is...
Do you know what? I saw that documentary in the theater.
I did as well.
While I was in rehearsal for Merrily We Roll Along at the Wallace.
You know what's so funny? Wouldn't that be hilarious if we were in the same theater? Because I saw it.
Were we?
We may have been, because I can't remember. I feel like I went somewhere like in Santa Monica or something. I remember I had to drive far.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't playing very many places.
No, we went to some weird little sort of indie movie theater. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if it was in Santa Monica? It was somewhere like West LA.
Yeah, it was somewhere where I had to drive quite a bit because I saw the trailer for this documentary and I was like, that looks incredible. And frankly, like, it brought me to tears. It was beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's on Amazon or something now. But
for sure. It's streaming somewhere and it's brilliant. It's really, really great. There's so many good documentaries. If you're looking to really delve into Sondheim, if you want like a biographical thing, there's 6 by Sondheim, which is on HBO. There's Best Worst Thing That Ever Could Have Happened. There are a bunch out there.
Yeah. So basically, the folks listening so far that are tuned in for their Disney podcast are saying to themselves, great, wonderful, but what does this have to do with Disney? And the reality is that Stephen Sondheim actually had a huge part in the touchstone picture, which of course is Disney, Dick Tracy from 1990. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I've known this for a very long time, but I got to be honest, like, going back and researching it and kind of studying it for this episode, I am number one convinced that Dick Tracy should be a stage musical.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I I've always loved Dick Tracy, and frankly, that film has never gotten the love that it should. And
why is that?
yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's a lot of Tommy guns and stuff in a, which is why it was released under Touchstone Pictures instead of Walt Disney Pictures. But I just feel like that had a lot to, like, Disney doesn't essentially promote those as much, and timing comes into a lot of stuff. I don't know, it was just never the hit that I feel like it should have been, and it's not like one of those cult classics like a Hocus Pocus or something like that, where like a decade later people finally figure it out. Dick Tracy's always kind of lived in this limbo of, there are people who really love it like myself, and then a lot of people who have never seen it even. And if you're one of those people who have never seen it, I highly suggest seeing it and checking it out. Because, not only is it great, but Stephen Sondheim wrote 5 songs for this movie. And
can I tell you something embarrassing? Is that I had never seen. No, I have seen it now, but I hadn't seen it until a few months ago.
Oh, what made you tune
not in
into
its
it?
entirety? Well, what made me not tune into it for so long, I will tell you, is that when I was a very young child, my older brother had a Dick Tracy comic book, and it was I don't know. The whole sort of world of Dick Tracy, but I remember this particular issue, the villain was Mrs. Pruneface, who is like the estranged wife of Pruneface.
Wow. I didn't know he had a wife.
Well, he does, not in the film, but in the comics, I guess. And for some reason, I mean, I was like 3 or 4 years old. I was so scared of Mrs. Pruneface. I read the comic and I had nightmares about this character who was just like a 2-dimensional like comic book drawing. And I don't know why, but she terrified me. So I could not get into Dick Tracy for the longest time. And then sort of just recently I was like, why the hell haven't I seen this movie? I had seen like the musical numbers on YouTube and stuff, and I actually knew the songs because I'd worked with singers on them and things. But I just never had seen the full film. So I ordered it on my Netflix DVD subscription, which I still have going, and I watched it, and it is pretty great.
It is, isn't it? Like,
yeah, it's really fun. It's really, it's of its time for sure. It's very much like sort of the original Batman films, and not the original, but the Tim Burton Batman films, and sort of all those kind of flashy, dark, superhero-y movies of the early 90s. It's super fun. It's just really fun. And to boot, it's like almost a musical.
Yes, like really. And it's interesting that you should bring up Batman because, fun fact, some of the backlot sets that they shot on were also used for the original Tim Burton Batman, as well as Dick Tracy. And Adam, you really want to have your mind blown?
What?
You walked down those streets with me.
I did!
Yes.
Those were the street on that lot.
The remember where the Annie stuff was?
Yes.
That whole Hennessy and Tenement Street?
Yes, I do. And by like the Newsies fire escape.
Yes, some Dick Tracy was shot there. Yeah.
Wow.
Crazy,
oh
right?
My God. That was a magical day.
Yeah.
Good. And Danny Elfman wrote the scores for both. So there you go.
That as well. Look at that. The Batman Dick Tracy connections are never ending here. So
yeah.
So this film, what's even crazier about it is like, yeah, it wasn't the smash hit they may have wanted, but the talent attached to it was insane. You got Stephen Sondheim, obviously, but then it was directed by Warren Beatty, who I believe still owns the rights to the character. So if we want to make that musical happen, Adam, we need to go talk to Warren Beatty. So let's make that happen.
Okay.
And then
I'd happily talk to Warren Beatty any day.
And then it's got people like Madonna, Al Pacino, and what I think is his best performance. Not that I've seen nearly all of his performances, but I love him in this movie to a level.
He's very good.
Oh, he's so good. Dustin Hoffman.
You can tell everyone in the movie is like having such a great time because they're playing such outlandish characters. They have all these prosthetics on their faces. They're playing comic book characters, so of course they're going to have a great time.
Yeah, and then Disney legend Dick Van Dyke is in there. I think, obviously with Warren Beatty directing, he had been in the industry for a long time. So these are all his friends coming to work on a movie with him. So it's
Mandy
very cool.
Patinkin.
Mandy Patinkin, I was just going to say, who plays 88 Keys in this and also has a history with Stephen Sondheim before this. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Well, he, of course, I think won a Tony for playing George Seurat in Sunday in the Park with George, Sondheim's show with James Lapine. I mean, Mandy Patinkin did have like a Sondheim album, I think, that I used to listen to where he sort of sang all the songs from Evening Primrose, which is a very obscure TV movie that Sondheim wrote in the 60s.
With some great music, though. Some great music.
It's a good movie, actually. I like it. I mean, it's super wacky.
Stephen Sondheim primarily writes music for the theater, and I don't think before Dick Tracy he had really written anything for the screen. And the reason that this came about was because, once again, Warren Beatty was a fan, and who's going to say no to a call from Warren Beatty? I mean, if you get that call, you do it, right?
Well, actually, the film writing that Sondheim had done just previously was that he wrote a theme of just music for Warren Beatty's prior film, Reds. And that's how Dick Tracy came about.
Oh.
So he didn't write the entire score, but he wrote one of the themes of the score from the film Reds. And after that experience, Warren Beatty asked him to write the songs for Dick Tracy. But Sondheim's not the only songwriter on Dick Tracy. His songs are the most prevalent, but there's actually a couple other songwriters who wrote, well, Danny Elfman wrote the score, of course, and then another songwriter wrote a couple of the background songs.
Yeah, there is way more music in this than I realized, because even before, going back and studying this and stuff, if you had said, Stephen Sondheim wrote music for Dick Tracy, I would have been like, 2 songs. And then I look back and like, he wrote 5 songs for this movie. 5 songs.
Yeah, and they're big featured songs. Like you hear them almost in their entirety, I think.
Yeah, and some of them, the first one we're going to talk about here is called Live Alone and Like It. And this one was interesting because it wasn't as featured as some of the others. It actually starts out kind of being heard as a song on the radio in some of the bad guys' car. And then it becomes, I call it the When Do We Eat montage, which is when the kid is essentially always asking, when do we eat? So this one, not super, super obvious. And the thing about Sondheim is, like, the man doesn't write a charm song. Everything he writes really has a purpose, right? And even when you don't think it does. And so going back and looking at this, I was like, this is actually quite brilliant, because, the song's called Live Alone and Like It. So it's about somebody who essentially enjoys being single, living alone, which is kind of where Dick Tracy is in this movie. But I love the juxtaposition of the visuals, because what we're getting is we're kind of seeing a very familial thing here with his girlfriend and the kid kind of acting like their kid. And it's this weird, we're hearing Live Alone and Like It, but the reality is we're kind of seeing Dick Tracy question, is that really what he wants for the rest of his life? And I was like, oh my God, it's a stupid little radio tune being played in the background of a when can I eat montage. And that's what Sondheim is giving us.
Yeah, that's the thing. All the songs, I mean, everything that Sondheim writes, that's why he's this master that people just revere, because he never half-asses anything and he never goes for the obvious. There's always layers. There are always extra sort of clever things between wordplay and music, and it's all connected. It's never just like, here's a cute song, that I threw up in a day. It's like, no. He takes this very seriously as an art form, and the result, I think, shows what you can accomplish when you take it so seriously.
Do you know about his process at all, as far as is he somebody that can write songs quickly? Because you've heard those stories of, that song was written in 6 hours for some composers. But have you ever heard, is he one that, no, I literally take weeks for everything I've ever written?
Yeah, he takes weeks.
Okay.
He takes a long time. And actually, I think he was asked to do the full score.
He was.
Either for Reds or Dick Tracy. And he said, no, it'll take me too long. I can't do it in time. Because he takes time, and he tells a great story. One of his idols is Jerome Kern, who was the composer of Showboat, among other things. And he tells a lot of stories about analyzing the music from All the Things You Are, which is a song for Jerome Kern that you probably know. You are the promised gift of springtime. Da, 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 da. You are the angel that, you know that song?
I actually don't know that song, no.
You probably would if you heard a real singer doing it with the orchestration. But he talks about analyzing that song and Circle of Fifths and all this stuff. But he also talks about how Oscar Hammerstein, who wrote the lyrics to that song, would be sitting in one room and Jerome Kern would be the other, and he would hear him sort of playing the notes, and he would try one note at a time, play through every note in the scale until he found the exact perfect one, and then move on to the next note. It sounds like just a melody you would just sort of come up with in the shower and then write down, but that's not how these guys operate. They really do methodically take this approach of, we have to find the perfect note and the perfect word. And I know that Sondheim is someone who just sweats and burns over each note and word in the thing, and it takes him a long time.
I'm going to go on a few tangents about this because this is all very fascinating to me. Number one, I find it fascinating that Sondheim is that way because he's also, like, he just turned 90 years old. So the man is, like, old school, but also very willing to have his shows updated in the sense that, like, you know, one of his more recognizable shows is Company, and the production that's supposed to be running on Broadway right now changed the sex of the lead character, and he's very much like, yeah, let's try it, let's do it, let's see if it works. So that's so interesting considering how much time and effort he puts into making it quote unquote right, that he's so willing to play.
Yeah, I heard him speak about that once, because he is sort of, there are a lot of other writers who really are opposed to that, and they don't like having their work, you know, changed in any way, and he is all for it. And he talks about, you know, in its initial production, if he's just written a new show and it's going to Broadway, he wants it done the way that he has written it and the way that he hears it in his head. And after that, as long as there's a record of the way that it was meant to be all along, he's perfectly happy for people to try things with the arrangements, with the characters. You know, he's very, I think, flexible with that kind of thing, but only after you get the sort of official production that is the way that he once heard it in his head.
But still, that's kind of awesome. Like, I applaud that because I think a lot of people would have difficulty with that. And the other thing you touched on, and I'm curious if you see this, you know, it's not uncommon for a singer who has, you know, everybody's vocal range is different. Some people can go higher, some people can go lower. And so sometimes you need to, what's the word I'm looking for? Help me out, Adam.
Transpose?
Transpose. I kept wanting to say transition. Yeah. I'm like, you know, you want to transpose the key of a song so that it fits your vocal range. Do you know if Sondheim specifically, but kind of just composers overall, how do composers feel about that? How would you feel about that? You're a composer, so...
It depends on the situation. I think most composers are pretty open to it because you want the song to sound as good as it can be. And I think having a singer, you know, be able to sing in the meat of their range is going to be a better result in the end than like, oh, I like the sort of color that E natural gives me or something. I think at the end of the day, you want the person's voice to really shine.
Yeah.
Because then they'll be more comfortable and be able to convey the lyric and everything more easily. I think most people are open to it. I think there are a few cases where it's like, no, that song really sounds right in a certain key and I don't want to change it. But I think for the most part, it's okay.
Cool. So with Live Alone and Like It, I'm curious, does it sound Sondheim to you? Because for me,
yes.
It does. Okay, so what does it remind you of?
It reminds me of a lot of the songs in Follies because that's a similar score and that he's writing in a pastiche style, meaning that he is purposefully trying to evoke musical idioms from another era. So because Dick Tracy is set in the 30s, he is really taking snippets of songs, and it's really obvious in More, which I'm sure we'll talk about, because he's using literal quotes from songs from that era. But in any of these songs, he's using sort of tricks and musical ideas from popular music of that time. So I think it's sounds of a certain period, but because it's Sondheim and it's him writing, and he's so unique in the way that he writes and the certain kinds of chords and notes that he likes, it still sounds like Sondheim, but writing through this milieu of 1930s pastiche.
Now, I might say something totally blasphemous here, and you can yell at me if I do, but when it comes to Sondheim, for me, I'm a ballad guy in general, but like really when it comes to Sondheim, I feel like his best and most memorable work are the ballads. And he writes a lot of like kind of patter stuff that unless you're listening to it in the context of the show, sometimes isn't the most enjoyable thing to listen to. And the thing that I found interesting about Live Alone and Like It was more up-tempo, kind of patter, but like super memorable still. So to me, it didn't pop as Sondheim, to be completely honest, but I kind of loved that about it.
Well, I think what's interesting about all of Dick Tracy is that it's very different than his musical theater writing, because when he's writing musical theater, he's really writing for character and plot. And his songs in Dick Tracy are diegetic. Is that a word that people know?
I don't, so please explain.
Okay. So diegetic music in theater or in film or TV or what have you is music that the characters are actually hearing. So it's being performed in a club, or it's coming out of a radio or out of an organ, or, whatever. It's real music in the real world. Whereas in a musical, a lot of the time, the music is non-diegetic, meaning it's in a character's head, or in real life, they'd just be speaking a conversation, but it's a musical, so they're singing. In Dick Tracy, all the songs are being sung, and it is acknowledged that they are being sung or coming out of a radio. It's real music. So it's not furthering characters, even though he slips in a little character development and plot development and little winks and things, like you talked about the irony of Live Alone and Like It, but it's this montage of this family unit. It's still not a character progression or a plot progression within the song. So it's a little more accessible in that sense. Whereas, like you said, if you're listening to some of his patter songs from his musicals, they're so character based and they really exist to get the plot from point A to point B. So it's a little harder to latch into just in a recording, a cast recording or something like that.
We're going to go on so many tangents today because I'm fascinated by all of this, but
I hope it's not boring. I try, and normally I feel like I'm more funny, and now I'm being so serious because we're talking about Sondheim.
I nerd out about this stuff. So, no, what it made me think of immediately when you were saying that was the movie Cabaret, because Cabaret, it's this whole suspension of disbelief thing. For some reason, audiences are more willing to suspend their disbelief in a theater than they are watching a movie. It's, I always go back to Flying in theater. You see the strings on Peter Pan and people are still in awe. Yet if you saw a string in a movie, you'd immediately be out of it and say, look, a string. So there's something there. And I feel like the same thing comes with musicals in movies. So if you think of something like the stage musical Cabaret, they have a lot of traditional musical theater, but when you think of the movie, it's much more diegetic and it's easier for the audience to accept. And for a more current reference, anybody that watched Glee, I'll tell you what it was. I think it was episode number 4 is where they kind of lost me, because it was the first time that the song wasn't diegetic. And so for the first 3 episodes, it was all music that lived, like they were singing it in the choir room or they were, And then I think it was the 4th episode. It was that I bust a window through your car or whatever the heck that song was. And it was like all in
Through your car.
What is it? Did I say the wrong lyrics?
Out your car. Bust the windows out your car, I think.
Whatever it is. I don't know. Who is that artist? I have no idea.
Well, Amber Riley sang it on Glee, but
she sang it. I don't know
originally.
I don't still to this day clearly don't know the song, but
that's a great song.
But in any case, that was the first time that they kind of it wasn't real life, and I was like, oh, why'd you do that? You were doing so well up until now, and. Yeah. I don't know. TV and film, we are so much less likely to accept it. So,
interesting.
It is interesting. It's very interesting to me. So, in any case, let's move on to the next song, Back in Business. This one was interesting because Madonna actually wrote a song for the movie called Back in Business, and it didn't work. So, kind of last minute.
Have you heard that version ever? Have we heard this version? I would love to hear it.
I actually think it's on her album. I think it's called I'm Breathless.
Of course.
So I'm Breathless was her album that came out.
We need to listen to that.
I know. I actually need to get so I have the Danny Elfman soundtrack, and that only has the Danny Elfman score. I didn't realize all the Stephen Sondheim stuff, or 3 of the 5 songs, are on Madonna's album. And then I didn't even realize this whole Madonna Dick Tracy I'm Breathless album is where the song Vogue came from.
I know. How crazy.
I had no idea. I'm telling you, the music in Dick Tracy is like a fascinating rabbit hole to go down, and it really should be a stage musical. And I sincerely, wholeheartedly feel that way. But back in business, the Madonna version wasn't working, and so Stephen Sondheim kind of last minute had to come in to write something, and it was more straightforward. I mean, this one was literally, we see Tracy in jail, the crime is up, there's gambling happening, holdups, and it's basically Big Boy Caprice, played by Al Pacino, saying, we're back in business, you know, the guy who was stopping us is now gone. A bit straightforward, right?
Yeah, it's super fun. And when I was listening to it, I was thinking like, oh, wow, for Sondheim, this really is straightforward and this really is fun. It's just like, back in business, da, 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 da. It just sounds very authentic to the period. And I thought, And then out of curiosity, I pulled up the sheet music for it just to see sort of what that looks like. And of course, it is the most complicated, rhythmically, like Sondheimian. It's got these running eighth notes, which you think of it, I think of the song as swung, but it's totally straight eighth notes. And it's got this crazy figure that brings to mind like Into the Woods or Franklin Shepherding from Merrily Roll Along, this like doodle-doo-doodle-doo-doodle-doo-doodle-doo-doodle-doo, this insanely difficult to play piano figure that runs underneath the whole thing. And I was like, of course, it's like this super advanced genius bit of accompaniment that you don't even necessarily notice when you hear the full band version.
Yeah, so this one was very catchy, and like you said, it's interesting to hear that the orchestrations are so difficult. That makes total sense, it being Sondheim. He's like, well, it's a straightforward song, so let's screw over the orchestra. Sharps, flats everywhere.
Yeah, and I don't even think he does it on purpose to try to be fancy. I think that's just how music comes out of him. That's what he hears, and he writes it down.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. So then we've got this song, More, which is the first time we hear this song is one of the funniest scenes in the movie, because if I haven't said it enough already, Al Pacino is brilliant in this movie, and he is essentially working as director and choreographer, teaching Madonna.
Which is so bizarre. He's like this gangster. Why is he choreographing a musical number in a nightclub?
Because he's a control freak, and he owns the nightclub, and he just took it over. He killed somebody to get ownership of that nightclub, and now he's like, we're doing it my way. And he, takes full control of everything.
So are we to assume that he choreographs every number now in this nightclub?
I have a feeling the girls do it themselves, and he takes credit, and then just kind of smacks them around a little bit and is like, hey, you're not doing it perfect, sort of thing.
Do you know what? There's some Broadway choreographers who operate along the same lines, if I'm being honest with you.
Would you like to list some names here? Or
Absolutely not.
That's funny. So it's just a great thing. More is another catchy tune, and it's used a few times in the movie. And this one is diegetic, as you said.
Yes.
I'm going to try and keep using that word correctly. Diegetic. It's
a great word.
I just
it comes in handy more than you might think.
So one of the things that I immediately thought of when I saw More, it's very kind of Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend-ish, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And this one was very much inspired by Gershwin. Did you read this?
Yeah, well, it's Gershwin, and there's a bunch of songs that he not only references, but like literally samples. I don't know if people were saying sample back then, but he samples two Gershwin songs. I Got Plenty of Nothing from Porgy and Bess, and something else that now I'm forgetting.
I've Got Rhythm.
I Got Rhythm, of course. Yeah, from Girl Crazy. And he also samples I Got the Sun in the Morning and the Moon at Night from Annie Get Your Gun, which is by Irving Berlin. And a couple other songs I think are in there as well. And this is another time when, oh, Sondheim, aren't you clever? You're so clever. Because what he's doing is he is evoking these songs that were so popular in the 30s. It was in the Depression. There was a sort of musical movement of these songs that were pop songs of the day, where they were about having less. It was all about, I don't have money, because no one had money in those days in America. It was all about, I don't have money, but I've got love, or I've got family, or I've got my health. So there's sort of whole spate of songs in those days that were like, you don't need money, you don't need diamonds, you don't need all these things. And he is turning that conceit on his head and using musical idioms from those days, but flipping the script for Madonna's character, saying, no, I need more, more, more. So again, it's like he plays these games with himself and the audience, and, you know, maybe it's too much, but it's also so clever and it makes me smile. So there you have it.
You know what it is, though? Like, to be that genius, life must be such a bore, because nobody can keep up with you. Like, right?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure he amuses himself in some way. I know he collects. Well, we don't want to talk about all that, but he collects games. He has like a world famous game collection of 19th century games,
like board games,
yeah, and card games and things. And he is really into crosswords, I know, and he loves like murder mysteries. Anything that's sort of a puzzle, whether it be a word puzzle or like a mystery book or whatever. You know, he just.
But when it comes to musicals, when it comes to a musical, he must see so many musicals and be like, "Wow, that was crap." Like,
well, so do I, to be honest with you.
fair enough.
Don't we all?
I don't know. I mean, or also like just knowing these little nuggets, like what you just talked about, is quite genius. And 95% of the people who hear that song will never think about that, like ever. Right. And I don't know, it's fascinating to me. I mean, genius, like in the literal sense of the word.
Yeah.
I love, one of the examples I love is in the song I've Got Rhythm. I love the line, who could ask for anything more? And like in this song, they're literally saying me, more.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's exactly what he's doing. Isn't that more interesting than just, you know, saying, here's a song that sort of sounds like something from the 30s, but it's probably not as good, and I just threw it together.
Totally, and that's what sets him apart. I just, you know, I'm sad for the fact that most people will never recognize that. Hopefully they're all smart enough to be listening to this podcast and learning all of this. But
hopefully.
I mean...
But the thing is, even if that's the thing, he's operating on so many levels that even if you don't know all that backstory and you don't know the musical references, it's still a totally enjoyable song. And most importantly, it serves its purpose in the context of Dick Tracy.
Yes.
And he would be the first to say that if a song didn't work and it was untrue to the character singing it because maybe it was too clever, he talks about I Feel Pretty from West Side Story, which he wrote the lyrics for. And he says, you know, he was really young at the time. He was in his 20s. It was his first Broadway show. And he says, you know, I was too clever with some of those lyrics because that character wouldn't talk like that. So he would be the first to say, at the end of the day, if the song doesn't work, it doesn't matter how clever it is. It's got to work for the piece that it's written for.
Absolutely. And one of the things I love about Dick Tracy, you know, it's funny because, you know, I've said several times now, I would love to see this as a stage musical. And I feel like a lot of times there are certain stories that would lend themselves to stage musicals. But the minute you say it, whether it's Superman, the musical, or Dick Tracy, the musical, it's kind of laughable because the first thing that people visualize is that lead character singing. And one of the very smart things that they do in this movie, and if they were to put it on stage, I would really hope we'll kind of get to this a little bit later, but if they were to do it like a Broadway musical of it, I would love it where Dick Tracy doesn't actually sing in the musical. It's everybody around him. And, you know, in the past, there have been Superman musicals where Superman did sing, and I think that immediately makes it laughable. So I feel like the story can be musicalized, but maybe not the lead character in a lot of cases.
Right.
So,
I once saw a very strange musical off Broadway called Kid Victory, which John Kander had written the music for, and I think Greg Pierce wrote the lyrics and book, but I could be wrong on that. And that was a situation where the lead character did not sing, I think, until the very last song in the show.
Oh, and that must have made such an impact.
It did. It was a very strange musical, though. It was about abduction, child abduction, and rape and things. It was really, really dark.
Sure, let's musicalize that.
Yeah, it was, but that's Sondheim's legacy right there. And Kander and Ebb also taking really dark subject matter and saying this deserves to be on stage too, even though you might not walk home, you know, with a skip in your step afterwards. We can still musicalize human stories and put them on stage. Not every musical has to be Hello Dolly, as much as you know I love Hello, Dolly.
Okay, are you ready for another tangent?
Yeah?
Okay, Moulin Rouge. I saw Moulin Rouge before it went to Broadway in Boston, the pre-Broadway tryouts. So I assume that this did not change when it went to Broadway, but perhaps it did. But I love the movie. I saw it like I think 5 or 6 times in the movie theater. And so for a long time I've been waiting for this to be put on stage. And long story short, I jumped through a lot of hoops to make sure I saw it in Boston. And I was so upset because I would say the movie emotionally grabbed me much more than the stage production until the last 10 minutes of the story. And that was where like all of a sudden my heart was in it and I was like, oh my gosh, and they're doing a reprise of Come What May. And I was really feeling it for these characters. And I was like, this is brilliant. And the lights go down and it's the end and you're like, thunderous applause. And then they came back with like a freaking Mamma Mia concert at the end. And I was like, are you kidding me? I'm like, it is okay to leave the theater feeling crummy. And I know that like mainstream audiences don't want that. They want their Mamma Mia ending. But I was so upset because I was like, you finally got to me. And then you shot it. It was all gone a second later because you had to do your musical montage at the end. Adam, it drove me through the roof.
I'm so sorry for you. I haven't seen it, I hate to say.
Oh, it's a great show. You should see it when you can.
Okay.
As much as
And I'll run out before the final montage.
Honestly, as much as I hate the people who do that,
I would never.
It's not a terrible idea for Moulin Rouge.
Get out of here.
Oh man, I legit, oh god, I make such angry faces at the people who leave during the bows. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Oh yeah, they're the worst. The ones who are like, we have to get to the car. Get out of here. Those actors what they just went through for you. You stand up and you clap for them for 2 seconds. Come on.
And while we're talking about it, I feel the same way about shows at theme parks. People listening who run to their fast pass while people are bowing at a show. Stay, applaud them. They're working their butts off for you. Anyway.
That's hard, though, because, you've paid so much money to be in there for the day. And it's like, if you don't use every minute, that's very challenging, especially for people. I mean, you live right there. You probably have an annual pass, I'm assuming, and things. But for people who've flown in from wherever and they've got 2 days to experience everything that Disneyland has to offer, that's hard.
Adam,
you do feel this pressure to be
30 seconds of bows.
I have to get on another ride. The what?
30 seconds of bows is not going to kill you.
No, I know that, but I'm saying that you do feel pressure to make every second count. And where you and I know, I think probably that the parks are best experienced at sort of a leisurely pace when you can actually just like enjoy yourself.
There needs to be balance.
And it's the same with like tourists who go to, a foreign city and they're like, I have to see every museum, and I can only spend 30 minutes in this art museum because I need to get to the next tourist attraction because, we're getting on a train to some other town tomorrow. It's very challenging. And now we can't go anywhere anyway. What are we talking about?
I don't know. Shall we get back to Dick Tracy?
Yes.
Let's move on to Sooner or Later, which I think I would say this is probably the biggest, most well-known one of the show. And this is Breathless Mahoney, Madonna's character, singing it in the nightclub. The thing that's interesting about this song is she's singing Sooner or Later You're Gonna Be Mine. And this has a double meaning because she's singing it about her desire to have Dick Tracy. And it's also about Dick Tracy's desire to catch Big Boy. Sooner or later, you're going to be mine. I'm going to throw you in jail. And I was just like, oh, it's so good. I love it.
It's so good. And this is the song that won Sondheim his Academy Award.
Yes. In 1991, he won the Academy Award for Best Song for Sooner or Later and Dick Tracy, which awesome.
Let me tell you, awesome. I clicked that link you sent me to watch Madonna. I had not seen Madonna perform it on the Oscars.
At the Oscars,
That is a bonkers performance.
I mean, talk about a Marilyn Monroe. And she was auditioning for a bombshell before it even existed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was very Marilyn Monroe. And a little wackadoo, to be completely honest.
A little wackadoo. And she certainly added some vamps and things to the song that weren't there originally to do a little extra stage business with that sort of fur stole she's got.
Yeah, they definitely played with the tempo and stuff, which personally I wasn't a huge fan of. I was like, no, I like the original. But, it's
you
the
know
Oscars.
who does Sooner or Later really well is Bernadette Peters.
Miss Bernadette Peters, yes.
In that Sondheim concert. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's how I first actually knew the song before I ever knew of Dick Tracy or anything.
Well, we're going to get into that because it's interesting to me how these songs have lived on beyond Dick Tracy because they are covered quite. I mean, you said you've played them for auditions before, right?
Auditions, concerts, all kinds of things, yeah.
It is shocking how much this music has lived on beyond Dick Tracy in the world of musical theater. It's very common for famous acts to do these songs in their cabaret acts. And I find that fascinating. But yes, I love Bernadette Peters' version of Sooner or Later. She gets up on top of the piano. She's very sexual.
Yeah. But of course she's Bernadette. So Bernadette also, though, she's sexy, but she also has there's like a wink to it at the same time. There's an intelligence to it that, no offense, but I don't think Madonna really grasped necessarily. But Bernadette Peters is one of the great interpreters of Sondheim works. She starred in the original productions of Sunday in the Park with George and Into the Woods. So she really gets it.
I would wholeheartedly agree. And I could go on a whole tangent about Madonna, but I'm not going to.
No, but I would love to go on a whole tangent about Bernadette Peters.
Oh, me too. We
could do a whole episode. Has she ever been in a Disney thing? Oh, yeah, she
did Cinderella, with the Whitney Houston Cinderella.
That's right, Cinderella. And wasn't she a voice? Oh, I'm thinking of Animaniacs. That's not Disney. She was the voice of Rita on Animaniacs.
She was also the voice in Anastasia, but actually Disney owns Anastasia now.
Oh yes, of course they do. Oh right, because they bought Fox.
Fox. Yeah.
Oh my God, Disney owns everything, including me.
Pretty much, yes, including you. Right? Have you been tattooed? Have you been branded yet by the logo?
I would be if they were like, you have to get this Mickey tattoo to keep working for us. I'd be like, sure, yeah, absolutely.
It's too funny. So yeah, Sooner or Later, big number. Is that the one you think deserved the Oscar? If one of these 5 songs was going to get it, is that the one that you would award it to?
I guess so. I mean, yeah, I feel like the Oscar sort of always goes to a sort of accessible, meaningful song. And I guess out of all of these, that would be the one. I think maybe What Can You Lose is a more sophisticated
that is the
composition, but I don't think What Can You Lose is like a crowd pleaser. You know, I don't want to see Madonna sing What Can You Lose at the Oscars.
Yeah, but it would have been Mandy, let's face it. But
yeah.
Okay, so let's go to What Can You Lose? Because this song, I honestly never appreciated it as much as I should until the Judy Kuhn performance kind of blew my mind on the...
Oh, okay.
Did you watch this call? Okay.
Of course okay. I did.
So Judy Kuhn, who is the singing voice of Pocahontas for you Disney fans, she sang this song, What Can You Lose, as part of the Sondheim 90th birthday celebration at broadway.com/Sondheim90 if you want to check it out. And she... I guess she can perform the heck out of any song. I love her voice at a level that is like, she can sing anything to me. If she sang Happy Birthday to me, I'd be happy. I love her voice, and her performance of this song just like brought it to a different level. And then going back and watching it in Dick Tracy where Mandy Patinkin and Madonna sings it, it's a great song. And it's this, once again, the lead characters aren't singing the songs that are about them. We've got 88 Keys and Breathless singing this song that is essentially about Tracy and his girlfriend Tess, because it's about Tracy not paying attention to what was right in front of him. And, you know, she eventually leaves him because he's just not paying attention. And I don't know, I loved this moment. I think it's brilliant. But of course, Can I
read you something what Sondheim wrote about this song?
Please.
In Look, I Made a Hat, his collection of lyrics. He writes, "The only reason for this song was Warren's desire to have Mandy Patinkin, who played 88 Keys, sing some something in the movie. When I grumbled that since the character was undeveloped, anything he sang would feel arbitrary, Warren urged me to look at his dialogue and see if anything might suggest itself, even just a title. Sure enough, in the scene directly preceding the sequence above, 88 Keys offers Big Boy a proposition to trap Tracy with the enticement, "What can you lose?" Done. That's it. That's all he needed. What can you lose? 4 words to then base this whole poetic, unrequited love number.
And that's
Gorgeous.
Unbelievable. Like,
I know.
Doesn't it make you feel inferior? I mean, it just...
Well, let me tell you something. No.
I mean...
Because I write musicals and I slave over them. And I also write very slowly. And yes, of course, I will always feel inferior to Stephen Sondheim. You'd be a fool not to. But I like to think that I understand a little bit of it because I have experienced some of the same struggles in writing when you do think, oh, this person needs a song, but what can it be? And I don't know. I would not, I shouldn't compare myself. I mean, that's ridiculous because obviously there's no comparison, but I get what he's saying.
Has there ever been like a line of dialogue or something that has inspired an entire song from you?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
You have to get inspiration from somewhere. And if you're writing from plot, you use the text.
It's interesting because I'm not a songwriter, but I obviously love music and love theater. It's funny because as much as I love music, I actually grew up, like the first cassette I ever owned was John Williams. It was a Star Wars thing. Oh, and for me, music, I fall in love with music through melody much more than through lyric. And it's not until listening a few times that like sometimes the lyric will hit me and be like, oh, wow, okay, that's what... So for me, it's more about the way that the melody makes me feel versus the way the lyrics make me feel. And sometimes I'll have this whole other realization about a song and be like, oh, wow, that's nothing what I expected it to be about because I'm finally listening to the lyric. Does that
How interesting.
Does that frustrate you as a composer?
Well, yeah. I guess, no, I would just maybe urge you just to listen differently to certain things because certainly when I'm listening to a film score, in any sort of instrumental piece, it's all about the music and it's all about the melody and how that can make you feel and how that tells the story, like in a ballet or something with no words. But I think in a theatrical piece, it's really important to find the place where the words and the music meet because they are sort of equally important at that moment.
Especially if they're good.
There's different writers.
If it's a good musical where they're actually telling the story through the song where you have to listen to really understand what's going on, then it's like, oh, okay, they're doing their job. But there are some shows where it's a lot of music that really, they could be saying anything and it doesn't matter.
Yes. Well, opera, I mean, look at opera. When you go see an opera, it's usually not in English. And even if it is, you can't necessarily understand what the words are. And it doesn't necessarily matter because the plot is not that intricate. And that really is about how the music makes you feel and about how the singer is making you feel. It's not really about the words. And that's why, to an unfortunate extent, which I think people are trying to correct with various movements, but when you think of operas, you really only think of the composers. You never think of the librettist, unfortunately. But it's because the music is so present in opera, and it is what you're there for. You're there to hear, those glorious Puccini melodies or what have you. And I think that applies to certain musical theater composers too. Andrew Lloyd Webber springs to mind, where something like The Phantom of the Opera or Cats is not really about the words. They're not really driving the story forward. The characters are in the same place at the beginning of his songs as they are at the end. We just have heard them sung really well and some really nice melodies for 3 minutes.
That was some serious Weber shade right there.
I like it, Andrew Weber, as much as the next person. I don't dislike these musicals. They're just a different style of writing.
Totally. One of my favorite musicals
more operatic.
Is Sunset Boulevard.
Mm-hmm.
I love
Sunset Boulevard. I love Sunset Boulevard. Okay. I really, really do. It's one of my, certainly my favorite Andrew Lloyd Webber show. Maybe Evita. Maybe Evita would be my favorite.
I'm looking at the poster right now. I love, no, sincerely, it like hangs.
I believe it.
Hangs next to my Newsies poster. I love Sunset Boulevard. But in any case,
I do.
Back to What Can You Lose? Anything else you want to add about this specific song? Because I really loved it, and It's the shining song in the movie for me now. I love it.
It's a great song.
Okay. Well, as you mentioned a bit earlier, Stephen Sondheim was asked to do the score for this film, and it was one of those things. Now, you said he felt like he didn't have the time to do it. What I read was he said he actually just wasn't that interested. It's not really what he does, and it didn't sound fun to him.
So he says, in 1981, Warren Beatty asked me to write music for his epic movie about the Russian Revolution, Reds. I told him I couldn't write the whole score because not only am I a slow writer, movie composers are forced to write their scores in astonishingly short periods of time, but because there was a good deal of battle music called for, and that kind of noise is largely a matter of orchestration, about which I know relatively little. I told him I'd be happy to supply the music accompanying the love story, which was as important to the film as the political events, and to my surprise he consented, hiring Dave Grusin for the rest. It was a gratifying experience. I was and am proud to be a part of that movie. Therefore, when he decided to make one with songs and asked me to supply them, I happily accepted the job.
There we go. That's, I mean, what a self-aware person to be able to say that and like know your limitations. And
that's the thing when you watch. I mean, listen, to be honest, I spent the morning like watching Sondheim documentaries to prepare myself for this. When you watch all these various interviews with him, and there are a lot of interviews that they use selections of in 6 by Sondheim on HBO, he's so well-spoken, he's so erudite, he's so intelligent, but he's not pretentious in any way.
Not at all.
He's very matter-of-fact. He is very concise, and that's what's so great about him also.
And people seem to love him. Like, as a person, seems like a great person. So, I don't know. Stephen Sondheim.
You know that Audra McDonald and Christine Baranski and Meryl Streep had dinner with him just before the pandemic, didn't they?
Oh, is that how that whole thing came about?
That's how that whole thing happened. Because they had, the three of them had dinner with him, and they were going to make it like a standing date where they were every few months or whatever, they were going to go on this dinner, the four of them, and then the pandemic hit and they couldn't do the next dinner. So they said, okay, well, we'll get together anyway and do this number.
That's so funny. If you don't know what we're talking about, that Sondheim 90th thing that I was talking about earlier with Judy Kuhn, you got Meryl Streep, Audra McDonald, and Christine Baranski singing Ladies Who Lunch from Company. So all of that you can find at, what was it I said? Broadway.com/Sondheim90. So totally worth it. It's crazy how much his music lives on outside of Dick Tracy, and his musical review, Putting It Together, features Sooner or Later, Back in Business, and Live Alone and Like It. And you know there are people watching that musical being like, what's this from? And but it works in these other situations. And I just love the fact that these songs live on, because a lot of times if a movie isn't a hit, like everything with it kind of just dies with it. And
was Dick Tracy not a hit?
It was not it wasn't a flop, but it was not a hit. And it's not something that Disney fans talk about a ton. I honestly think now is the time for a remake. I think that it would do very well right now.
Yeah. Like
I said at the beginning, I'm pretty sure Warren Beatty owns the rights to the character. And if he doesn't want to do something with it, nothing's going to get done with it.
Right.
But
why is the movie so hard to come by? Why isn't it on Disney Plus or somewhere?
Well, Disney Plus is they're editing the crap out of everything so that it's all family friendly. And when you have people shooting each other with Tommy guns, it's very difficult to make that family friendly. So it may eventually.
They've got the Avengers and everything.
They make edits to those films to a point.
They do?
Yeah, they've done some crazy stuff. Like I guess in Splash, you see Daryl Hannah's backside, and they digitally extended the length of her hair so that it covers.
Oh, wait, I did know that because I actually watched that race. I had never seen it, or at least it had been many years. I couldn't remember it. And my boyfriend is a huge Splash fan, and so we watched it together, and he was like, wait a minute. This is not what I remember.
Yeah.
She looks different.
Yeah, so Disney Plus is a bit neurotic when it comes to
I hope they don't edit me out of Encore. After they listen to this.
Adam is way too inappropriate. We're editing him out. It's hilarious. God. Too funny. So in any case, the songs do live on. Before we go, I do want to touch on a couple of other things Sondheim did and or is doing with Disney. One of them's Into the Woods, which I got to be honest, Into the Woods was my introduction to Sondheim. I saw so many productions of Into the Woods as a kid. It is probably my favorite Sondheim show. I'm
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say.
I mean, I grew up watching the original Broadway production because they had showed it on PBS.
Yes.
And my parents taped it off the VCR for me. And that was like, I watched that so much as a kid and as an adult, frankly.
Yeah.
And if you have only seen the Disney feature film of Into the Woods, I highly recommend you go back and watch the original Broadway production, which they filmed and is available streaming in multiple places, I believe.
It's also, I have a DVD of it. So it's available. I had a VHS that I purchased originally, then upgraded to DVD. It might even be available Blu-ray now. But yes, it's great. Speaking of Bernadette Peters, stars as the witch in that.
Yes.
And she's brilliant. But it's a brilliant, brilliant show. I thought they did, the original Broadway production is 1987. The movie was 2014 that Disney did. I thought they did an okay job. For a musical that I loved so much, I expected to love the movie more, and I certainly don't dislike the movie, other than the fact that they cut one of the most important songs, No More, which was devastating to me.
Yeah,
but
they cut that whole character, the mysterious man.
Yeah,
thing.
I thought that was a huge error.
There's so many cuts. It's hard. I mean, I was watching it just now, and that's a hard. I get, of course, why they would want to make a movie of it, but that's such a theatrical musical. It really is highly stylized in the presentation of it and in the writing of it. It's such a distinctive 2-act structure, and of course films are almost always a 3-act structure. It's hard. I wouldn't, if I had been tasked with that, you have to trim an hour out of Into the Woods. Where do you start? I don't even know what I would do.
It wouldn't have been No More. I'd get rid of I'd get rid of Hello Little Girl or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, No
that
More.
Hello Little Girl is rough. Why is he in a zoot suit?
And
I don't
Johnny
understand
Depp
what's
wolf.
going on.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but of course, Stephen Sondheim, the cool thing is whenever they do make movies out of his musicals, he's almost always a consultant, and once again very willing to let them play and do these things, and sometimes even writes additional music for it. I'm just curious, before we move on from Into the Woods, do you have a favorite song on that show?
In Into the Woods?
Yeah.
Ooh, they're all so good. I mean, I love Last Midnight.
Oh, that's a good one.
Probably one of my all-time favorites. Moments in the Woods, which the baker's wife sings.
That's a great one.
Great. On the Steps of the Palace, I think. I Know Things Now, which Little Red Song, which I never liked as a young person, and now that I'm a little older, just rings in a completely different way. The whole thing, I can't pick.
It Takes Two.
Is so great. It Takes Two.
That's the one.
Genius. It Takes Two. I recently, just because I had nothing better to do, did like a Twitter thread ranking my favorite opening numbers from Broadway musicals. And the prologue from Into the Woods. I can't remember exactly what the ranking was, but it was really high up there because it's just the way it sets up so much plot and character, and it's like 14 minutes long for an opening number. It's so good. It's all so good.
It's a great show. I love Into the Woods, and honestly can't even count how many productions I've seen because I love it. I would just see anybody
even productions that like aren't great it still works because the writing is so good.
Even Encore productions of Into the Woods.
That's right. Cool. That Encore pilot.
There we go.
It's out there somewhere. If you can find it, you can watch a very trimmed down production of Into the Woods.
And then there is, coming up this December 18th, 2020 is the current release date by 20th Century Studios, which of course is now owned by Disney. West Side Story, directed by Steven Spielberg. The original Broadway production was 1957, and I got a really weird kind of funny story to tell you about this.
Oh, good.
When I was in middle school, I was taking
Hang on, let me get my popcorn. I'm just kidding. Go on.
When I was in middle school, wow, so mean. When I was in middle school, I was in a graphics class, and we had to basically create like our own little newspaper sort of thing. So part of a newspaper is advertisements, right? And at the time, I was obsessed with West Side Story, and I was obsessed with Steven Spielberg. And in this newspaper was an advertisement that I created for West Side Story, directed by Steven Spielberg. Kid you not, truth.
Oh my God, you made it happen. You secreted it.
I secreted West Side Story Spielberg. Isn't that unbelievable? But
wow.
seriously, I wish I could.
We'll have you to blame if it's bad.
Yeah, true. Well, we'll see how it is. I don't know. But Stephen Sondheim is involved. Of course, for this, as you mentioned, he was just the lyricist. It was his first Broadway gig, and that must have been, I would imagine, so frustrating for him, for a guy who is such a composer and lyricist. To just write lyrics, but
I think because it was his first show, it was like his first professional gig, which can you imagine? And here he is writing lyrics for Leonard Bernstein, which is, that's the end all be all of serious music composing. I don't think he was that frustrated. I think he looked, in these interviews you hear him talk about, I think he asked Oscar Hammerstein, he said, should I take this job? I really do want to write music and lyrics. He said, yes, absolutely. You will learn from these great people that you're working with, Arthur Lawrence and Jerry Robbins and all these titans of American musical theater. Take the job. What are you talking about? Of course you should do it. Just because you want to be a composer. I think he had more of an issue after that with Gypsy, because at that point he'd already written lyrics for a Broadway show and he didn't want to get pigeonholed. He really did want to be taken seriously as a composer. So that was more of a, oh gosh, what am I doing to my career if I just write more lyrics? Because originally he was supposed to write music and lyrics for Gypsy, and it was actually Ethel Merman who didn't know him and didn't trust him, and she was already attached to the project and said, no. I don't know who this kid is. I've never heard his music before. We need to get somebody in here who knows what they're doing.
That sounds very Merman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Excellent.
Well, the best Merman story I won't tell because I can't swear on this podcast, but Stephen Sondheim tells it hilariously in Six by Sondheim again on HBO. A really, really funny Ethel Merman story.
And isn't Six by Sondheim, doesn't Jeremy Jordan of Newsies fame sing in that?
He does. He and Darren Criss and
song?
America Ferrera do Opening Doors from Merrily We Roll Along.
Ah, yes.
And Jeremy Jordan plays Charlie Kringus, who is supposed to be like a nebbishy sort of, it's just so strange because Jeremy Jordan is like one of the most beautiful people in the world. And he's playing this like nerdy type. It makes no sense, but it's still fun.
Well, it's like the Seymour Krelborn thing with Little Shop. That's sexy nerdy.
He played that too, didn't he?
Yeah, he did do that recently, yeah.
Yeah.
So in any case, folks, I hope...
And you can hear Jeremy Jordan sing on the cast album of my musical, Terrytown.
Do you want to plug it now?
Streaming everywhere. I want to plug it throughout the entire thing. Just pepper it in through the entire episode.
Okay. Go ahead. Plug it again.
Okay, so I wrote a musical many years ago called Terrytown, and just recently, literally like last week, I have released as a, fundraiser for the Actors Fund, which is an amazing charity who's giving out lots of money to artists affected by COVID-19. I have released a heretofore private studio cast recording with Jeremy Jordan, Andy Mientus, and Krista Rodriguez singing the score with a 6-piece orchestra, and it is streaming everywhere you listen to music: Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, Google, YouTube. So give it a listen because we're raising money for a good cause, and I happen to be pretty proud of the musical as well.
Definitely.
And it's based on The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which is also a Disney film. So there you have it.
There you go. And definitely give it a listen. I did. I loved it. And Jeremy Jordan has the voice of an angel. Like,
it's so good. Oh my, did you watch the Bombshell concert?
Yes, I did. We'll talk about that off the air after. Because yes.
When does he breathe? I don't get how he does it. He's so good.
Unbelievable. But seriously, folks, you should check out Adam's musical. It's fabulous. And I'm really happy for you that you got to do that.
Thank you. And I'll also plug Encore while I'm here. If you haven't yet, please do watch Encore on Disney Plus because I'm much funnier and don't talk as much on that show than I did just now.
But you're always enjoyable, so it doesn't matter.
Well.
But shall we get to some trivia now?
Ooh, yeah.
Okay, let's do some trivia.
Do you know the answer? Get your brain gears churning and play along. It's trivia time.
Alrighty, Adam, do you want to hit me with a trivia question first, or shall I hit you?
I'll hit you.
Okay, let's hear it.
Just in case we have the same one. Okay, so Sondheim won his Academy Award for Sooner or Later from Dick Tracy. Mm-hmm. Which song did he win his Grammy for writing?
Ooh, something from Dick Tracy?
No.
Oh, okay. A Grammy for writing...
for Best Song. He has a few Grammys for cast albums and things, but he won a Grammy for Song of the Year, I believe.
Was it from a movie?
No, it was not. It was from a musical.
Oh, gosh. I'm gonna... Oh, gosh. I'm totally blanking. What show is it from? Give me that hint.
It's from A Little Night Music.
Oh, Send in the Clowns.
It is Send in the Clowns.
Send in the Clowns.
Yes.
Excellent.
So 75, I think.
He is just an Emmy away from an EGOT. He's got...
Does he not have an Emmy? He doesn't have an EGOT?
I don't believe he has an EGOT. He has a bunch of Tonys.
He better get busy.
A bunch of Tonys, bunch of Grammys, one Oscar. So he needs the Emmy, I believe. So
wow.
So mine is a little random, and people who listen to the show regularly should know the answer to this. But in 19...
Way to call me out. Oh, no.
It's long before we knew each other, so don't even worry about it. In 1990, where could you hear Stephen Sondheim music prominently featured in a Walt Disney World theme park?
In 1990, in a Walt Disney World theme park. Can you tell me which theme park?
Well, it was Disney MGM Studios.
Okay, it was MGM Studios. Okay, so...
You probably don't even know that this existed, and I can't wait to introduce you to it.
Oh, God. Ooh, okay, then what is it?
Dick Tracy in Diamond Double Cross.
What's that?
There is a stage musical in the theme park. It's totally theme parky.
Wait, before the movie came out?
Right before. It was like to promote the movie and then lasted a little bit after.
Okay.
And it is phenomenal. But there are pieces of, some of the songs he wrote for the movie in this little stage musical with a bunch of other stuff. And once again, Dick Tracy does not sing in this. And it's just like the extent of him singing
Was it like in that theater?
It was in the theater that it was in a different location at the time because Sunset Boulevard didn't exist, but the theater where Beauty and the Beast live on stages now. It was in, I think they called it this All-Star Theater or something like that. And it was in that, and they even had a version of it at Disneyland as well, where they currently do Mickey and the Magical Map. So...
Whoa.
I've done a whole episode about it, episode 571 of Disney Coast to Coast. You can hear me talk about this and some other live stage shows that were at Disney MGM.
And can I watch it somewhere?
I will send you a link. It's on YouTube.
Oh, how exciting.
It's really, it's a theme park show, but
with
so great.
Dick Tracy songs.
It's so great. It's so great. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
So that's going to do it. And this is the point of the show where we wrapped up trivia and I say, Adam, is there anything you'd like to plug?
Well, funny you should mention it. See, I don't even wait for the invitation.
It's fun.
I just plug things left and right before anybody can even ask.
We got Terrytown, we got Encore.
We got Terrytown, we got Encore. What else is there? Nothing.
Where can people find Terrytown again? Tell them the easiest way to get their hands on this, because they really should hear it.
Probably the easiest way is just honestly to search whatever music thing you use. If you download albums on iTunes, that'll give the most money, that or Amazon. But if you use Spotify or Apple Music or Google Play, any of those things, you just search for Terrytown and either my name or Jeremy Jordan or Cast Recording. It's on all of that. So it's pretty easy to find. If you really get lost, you can go to my website, adamwachter.com, and there are links on there.
Excellent. Well, Adam, thank you so much for coming on the show to talk about and celebrate theater and Stephen Sondheim.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And for you folks who had never heard the name Stephen Sondheim before, I hope that both Adam and myself had convinced you how important this 90-year-old man is, and and this little touch of influence he's had on Disney, even though people don't necessarily think of him that way. So, Adam, this was so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, folks, if you want to hear more about Adam's career and how he got involved with Encore on Disney+, go back and listen to episode 711 of Disney Coast to Coast. And if you haven't listened to this past Wednesday's episode yet, tune in to hear from Disney travel advisors giving their best vacation planning advice. And don't forget that you can always hear the latest Disney news and the House of Mouse headlines every Sunday right in your Disney Coast to Coast podcast feed. If you're not subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the magic on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more favorite podcast listening platforms. Also, this month is a live stream Q&A month for members of the DCTC community over at patreon.com/DisneyCTC. To join us for the live stream, head on over there and sign up, as well as find out what other awards are waiting for you. Once again, that's patreon.com/DisneyCTC. patreon.com/DIZNEYCTC. And finally, I want to give a big loud shout out to Aussie, who left a 5-star rating and review for Disney Coast to Coast over on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much, Aussie. Your 5-star rating and review helps other Disney fans find the show more easily. If you'd like a shout out on the show, just head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star rating and review. Thanks again, Aussie. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!
Thanks for listening to Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePauli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com.